You want me to hold it or anything?
I think I can.
Good.
Is that big enough right there to fit in the pot?
For sure. Stick them in this one. Nice. What I'm going to do is when we get inside, I'm going to split them up because these are the ones that have the better
Stuff.
Yeah, I don't want to put all of this in such a
put
small
some ribs in
amount.
there.
Yeah.
So
I say just the rib bones. This
yeah,
isn't.
I'm gonna cut them into small pieces.
Yeah, that can be easily. So if you just, do you want me to hold them there? Or you got it.
Let's see. Okay.
First.
Okay, so there's like breaking.
Right on. Good morning everyone. Today we are making bone broth. We are going to be using some moose bones that we have from a moose that we were recently fortunate to get from the roadkill list here in Alaska. And so Eric and I sawed them up this morning and we're ready to rock. If you've never made bone broth before, it's really simple. It is basically animal bones and water. And what happens is you cook it for a very long time and you get all the nutrients inside of the bones breaking down in that liquid for really good flavor. And again, all of these minerals and amino acids and all this good stuff for you. And again, even though bone broth is really simple to make, it is time consuming. So bones like these, like a moose or even a cow that have really big joints, they're going to take at least 24 to 48 hours to break down. And so we're doing this a really cool way that we learned about last year from a viewer. They mentioned why not try making it in our pressure canner. And that is just totally awesome. This is our new favorite way to make bone broth. It expedites it tremendously. We're only going to have to pressure cook these for 2 hours, so 120 minutes compared to 48 hours. Now, if you can't get your hands on bigger bones, definitely chicken bones work well too, and those only have to go for about 12 hours, and you can even do them a little bit less than that because they're smaller bones, so it doesn't take as long of time for all of that, nutrients inside the bone marrow to dissolve into the water. One key step with making bone broth is going to be vinegar, so you can use distilled white vinegar or apple cider vinegar, which we're using today, and that helps expedite the process and dissolve all of those nutrients into the water. You've probably heard a lot about bone broth and how healthy it is for you. We really like using it for flavor. It is awesome for soups. It can be used just like chicken stock or vegetable stock. So also when you're cooking rice, even pasta, beans, we love it for beans. It's just really a great flavorful addition to any of your recipes. We're going to move over to our pressure canner and show you what we have going on here. We separated half of the bones we have available, and the reason we did that is because our pressure canner cannot fit all of the bones. And even though it looks like it can fit, you never want to fill these up more than 2/3 of the way with water or with the bones themselves. And that's just because it's going to be under a lot of pressure. So we went with pretty much half and half. I am going to be adding a little more water and some vinegar to this, and I'm going to go off of a line we have on our pressure canner. Normally you just want to put enough water to submerge the bones, and that's so you get a really flavorful broth and all of the collagen breaks down. And what happens when the collagen breaks down is it gets really thick. It turns into gelatin. So that's how you know your bones have cooked long enough. In this case, we're using big, hearty bones, so I know that there's definitely enough nutrients in those bones. So I'm going to add a little more water, and then I'm going to add the vinegar. And I never use a specific measurement for the vinegar that we're adding. This is a 21 quart pressure canner, and I'm probably going to be adding about 1/4 cup, so I'm just guesstimating. But you want to add a good amount. I'd say a good splash, and don't be worried because the bone broth, the final product, will not have any taste of vinegar. We're going to go ahead and turn this on. We're going to put this top on lock it in place. And just follow your specific pressure canner, you know, that model's instructions. We're following ours. We're going to be cooking our bones for 120 minutes, and we're going to wait until the cover lock or this air vent pops up, and we will also let this vent for 10 minutes, and then we're going to add our gauge. And once it gets to about 13 to 14, we're going to start the timer. That's just before ours starts to rock. So it does need some supervision because it's going to be very high for a few hours. But we much prefer doing it this way because the other way, like I said, it can take 2 full days of being on a stove, and that also requires some supervision. When this is done, we're going to make a second batch, and then we are going to be pressure canning it later. That'll most likely be tomorrow once we've strained it. So we're going to bring you guys along for the whole process. This has been venting for 10 minutes, so I'm going to add our weight, and then when it comes up to 13 or 14 pounds, I'm going to monitor the temperature, and we're going to put on the time for 2 hours. It's been 2 hours. We're going to turn off the heat and let this pressure drop down to 0 before we remove the lid.
Our pressure has dropped to 0 on our bone broth, and I'm going to step in and be straining this for Ariel since it's a pretty heavy pot. And to strain it, we just have a strainer and some cheesecloth.
So that turned out really well, just as expected. And what happens if you've done it for long enough, the bones themselves will actually be really brittle. If you want to look at them, they're really hot right now, but once they cool, they'll be brittle, and that's kind of why they have this chalky appearance. And so you can do a few different things with them. We, in the past, have ground them up. You know, they basically just break down with your hands. They're so brittle when they're cool, and given them to our dogs. We're probably going to be giving these to the chickens because there's a lot of meat and still really good stuff on there. Other things are, you know, composting them or even grinding them up and putting them back into your garden. Now we have to repeat this process with our second batch, so we're going to do that all again, and then we will pick back up with you guys when that second batch is done. We finished cooking both batches of bone broth, and now we are going to let this sit until tomorrow. We got quite a bit, and what needs to happen is it needs to cool down overnight, and the fat will solidify on top, and we're going to skim that off tomorrow before we reheat it back up and get it ready to pressure can. We're back in the kitchen, and our bone broth has cooled down, and you can see that there is just a little bit of fat. Now, when doing this with pork, chicken, or beef, you'll usually get a lot more fat, and you want to skim that off or ladle off as much of it as you can. That is not penetrated as well by the heat when you're pressure canning, so it's just advised that you remove as much of that as you can, even though that does have a lot of the flavor. This is our first time doing this with moose, and moose does not have a lot of fat, so we really just didn't end up with much. And you just want to get as much off as you can. If there's still a little bit, that's okay for the pressure canning process. So I will show you guys what I'm talking about here. If I just pull that lightly across, that's the fat, and that's all there is. It's practically nothing. So I'll try and get some of that off with the spoon, but I'm not going to be able to get all of it out, obviously. And by no means do you need to throw this away. You know, you could cook something in it. I'm going to move on to the second pot, and again, fear not if there's a little bit of fat left behind. Then the next step is to put this back on the heat and get it boiling before we put them into the cans and get them pressure canned. So this is all we really ended up with. It's not much, and I'm not too worried that I wasn't able to get all of it out of this batch. Eric has plans to make this into a bird treat. We're going to be putting this with some grain and letting it solidify and putting it outside for the wild birds. I'm going to get this first pot on our stove so we can get it heated up. And we're going to get our jars ready. I like to rinse them with some hot water and soap. We're leaving an inch headspace for canning these, and then we are going to wipe down the rims with some vinegar to clean them, clean that oily residue off, and then we will be using some heated up lids. And we like to heat up our lids just a little bit on a light simmer because we found that we have less success with them sealing if they're not preheated. So our pressure canner is able to do 7 quarts at a time, and I believe we're going to have anywhere from 20 to 21 altogether, and that means 3 batches for us today. Each one has to go for 25 minutes at 11 pounds pressure. There we go. So we're going to get that heated up. It looks like it's already on. And we just put a little bit of vinegar in there. That helps the glasses from getting foggy. It's not necessary at all, but it just kind of helps them look prettier in the long run. So I'm now going to add the weight. We'll let it get up to 11 pounds, and then we will start our time for 25 minutes. And we have to do this 3 different times today, so we will catch back up with you guys when we're done with the last batch. Our last batch has finally finished, so we are going to pull them out. And we're going to be letting everything sit overnight to make sure that everything's sealed. And then we can label it tomorrow and show you guys what the finished product looks like. Alright, it's the next day and we finished our bone broth. We ended up with 21 quarts that are pressure canned. We had a little bit left over extra, but we went ahead and put that aside. We're going to use that for dinner. And I just wanted to show you guys what the finished product looked like. They were a little bit tricky for Eric and I to clean because there was some oil residue on them, but we just wiped them down with some soapy water and vinegar, and they are all clean now and ready to go into our root cellar. We're going to be storing ours in the root cellar, but you can definitely store them in room temperature. They'll last for years if they make it that long. Really, again, a really delicious thing to have in your house, something we love. Let me go ahead and show you what this one looks like. So this one is a little bit jelly, and that's what it is supposed to look like. And it can actually be a lot, thicker, and that's because of the collagen breaking down into gelatin. It'll give it that jiggly texture. So this looks pretty good, but if you added a little bit less water, you'll probably get a thicker product. And as far as the nutrients go, I mean, it's still really good for you if it ends up being a little bit thinner. And if you find that it is a little too liquidy, maybe just go a little bit longer or add a little more vinegar and you may get a nicer product. You'll also find that if you put this in the fridge or you store it at a colder temperature, it will thicken up. So these have been sitting at our room temperature, so they're a little bit less thick. But once we move them down to the root cellar, that's more of a refrigerator temperature, so they will thicken up a little bit. We hope you enjoyed the video, and I'm going to be moving these down to the root cellar. Ooh, there's... I don't want to hit them. Hey, girl.